The objective today is to describe what the Intel manual says about operand and address size attributes. So we're still on page 80 here. And before I really get into the reading, let me just say, sorry for being so short in the previous video about the instruction pointer. I mean, this is an interesting register, but I plan on getting into the details a little bit later. But just to give you more questions, I want to show you a question I answered on information security. This is a Stack Exchange site. So the person asks, what does EIP stand for? I mean, that's a really simple question. They give us some details as to why they're asking about this in the information security forum. They just say that there are a ton of questions out there that reference the EIP, so they ask how is it used, both as an exploit target and in benign code. So the first answer is great. I mean, it's short and sweet. The person says EIP as a register, an x86 architecture, as in 32 bits. This is standing for extended instruction pointer. Extended because we went from 16 bits to 32 bits. And the person goes on to say that what an instruction pointer is, it just tells the computer where to go to execute the next command, and it's controlling the flow of the program in that sense. And then they encourage the person to study more about assembly, gives the person a link. So yes, if you're working with assembly language at a very low level, you're telling the computer specifically what to do. So with my account here, I went ahead and said what the first two people didn't, and that is this EIP, it is one of the most basic program execution registers on an Intel or AMD chip. Now regarding his first part of the question, like how does EIP relate to exploits or as a target for exploitation, I said this particular paragraph in the Intel manual kind of says it all. I mean, it's really difficult to exploit it. And for what purpose, that would be a whole nother question. But let me read. It says the EIP register cannot be accessed directly by software, okay? It is controlled implicitly by control transfer instructions. So at that assembly level, you'll see these types of instructions. But also the computer has interrupts and exceptions. And these three things can change the value of the EIP register. Now I'm quoting Intel here. The only way to read the EIP register is to execute a call instruction and then read the value of the return instruction pointer from the procedure stack. So you have to do all that trickery. And the EIP register can be loaded indirectly by modifying the value of a return instruction pointer on the procedure stack and executing a return instruction. So I think the key word right there being indirectly. So for me to add to that, I said that understanding the role EIP plays in a program seems simple yet complex when you consider the combination of this code segment register with EIP. These two things are making what we call a logical address for the computer to use. And because all x86 CPUs use prefetching, this complicates things. If we read the value of EIP from the data bus, that won't necessarily be what's in the EIP register. But like I said before, I mean, the simple part to an instruction pointer is the idea that it is used to determine the location of the next instruction. And you're using the code segment register because in that part of memory, the code segment, that's where all the instructions are. Unless we're talking about a chip not using segmentation. Now, regarding benign code, like the person asked, I mean, okay, well, anytime your code executes an algorithm or calls a function, like you'll be using that value inside of the EIP. Whether you know what it is or not, you'd be able to utilize that, or your program will be utilizing that to execute correctly. So let me just ask the general question of like, what is tricky about this EIP register? Why is this register absolutely necessary, okay? Maybe another question, what segment would this register be concerned with? So here's a little more fleshing out that section of the Intel manual. But now we can go ahead and focus on this operand and address size attributes. When the processor is executing in protected mode, and I asked the question, is this the most common mode? From my research, it looks like yes. And according to a really interesting website called wiki.osdev.org, someone said that the protected mode is unleashing like the real power in your machine. And this protected mode is opposed to the real mode. If you're using real mode, there are some problems that can arise. But the benefit of that is you can execute older code. So When the processor is executing in protected mode, every code segment has a default operand size attribute and an address size attribute. These attributes are selected with the D standing for default size flag in the segment descriptor for the code segment. To learn more, see Chapter 3, Protected Mode Memory Management. Now when the D flag is set, the 32-bit operand size and address size attribute are selected. So here's a good question. What size are operands and addresses when the D flag is 1? When the flag is clear, the 16-bit size attributes are selected. So when the processor is executing in real address mode, okay, see, as opposed to protected mode, the default operand size and address size attributes are 16 bits. Now the operand size attribute selects the size of operands when the 16-bit operand size attribute is in force. That's some strong language from the Intel manual I'm not used to reading, so I said, wow, did the writer have coffee that day? Maybe they're using a stronger word to allude to the idea that, real mode, when you're in real mode, you're forcing these 16 bits to exist. Maybe you're playing with fire by using old code because of whatever reason. But regardless, when you're using these 16-bit sizes, operands can generally be 8 bits or 16 bits, and when in 32-bit operand size attribute is in force. So that's kind of a weird wording right there. So instead of saying when in protected mode, the 32-bit operand size attribute is in force, operands can generally be 8 bits or 32 bits. So what's with the 8 bits? Just kidding, that probably is not a good question. Let me try again. So how many bits can operands be in real mode and protected mode? So we're looking at 8 and 16 or 8 and 32. So 8 is very reasonable because if we're talking operands like a single letter or a number that is less than 256, again, sounds reasonable. Now the address size attribute selects the size of addresses used to address memory. The redundancy there. And now these addresses can be either 16 bits or 32 bits. When the 16-bit address size attribute is in force, segment offsets and displacements are 16 bits. This restriction limits the size of a segment to 64 kilobytes. But when the 32-bit address size attribute is in force, segment offsets and displacements are 32 bits, allowing up to 4 gigabytes to be addressed. So a quick diagram for you right here, because I'm working on a segment register video. This is what they mean by a segment value and an offset, which can be used to create an address. So in terms of a question, maybe we could say, what two sizes can an address be, either 16 or 32? Now the default operand size attribute and or address size attribute can be overridden for a particular instruction by adding an operand size and or address size prefix to an instruction. So I wrote what suspense, what anxiety. They don't tell us the name of that particular instruction. Maybe when we get to Chapter 2, instruction format, they will, but it would have done no harm to throw it in right here so I don't have to wait. And to add to the suspense, they say that the effect of this prefix only applies to the targeted instruction. So an idea I came up with not too long ago is I'm going to have an accompanying images document to go with this Intel manual because images help people learn. So when I find out whatever this instruction prefix is, I'm going to connect it to this idea that it is used to specifically target a particular instruction. And so therefore I'm thinking the use of a prefix to override the size attributes of both operands and addresses would probably be a pretty rare thing. So I'll simply ask, can you override these sizes of operands and addresses? The answer is yes, and if you want to really flesh it out, you could say there is a particular instruction prefix to use. And if you're a real overachiever, you'll go hunt down that prefix yourself and tell me. But let's finish with the table. Table 3.4 shows the effective operand size and address size when executing in protected mode or compatibility mode, depending on the settings of the D flag and the operand and address size prefixes. Oh, okay, so the suspension is gone. The prefix here is 668. No, the prefix is 66, I suppose, in hexadecimal. And if you need to override the address size, you're going to use 67. So I'll finish the lesson with this question. What prefix would you use to override an operand, an address, and then what would the D flag need to be set to in both circumstances? So this is a pretty cool table actually. Here's the D flag. So in these circumstances, the D flag is a 0. In these, it is a 1, and so if I go over here to operand size, I could follow it to a 0, and am I able to override? No, no, yes, in which case it can be a 32 now, if we're talking an operand, or 16 if we're talking an address, and so on. So thanks for watching, and next time we'll talk about these sizes in the context of 64-bit mode.